Sometimes life is messy. Have you ever wished you could refocus your mind, home, relationships, and work life? Join us as we use research-based information to make practical changes and simplify life. This is Life Simplified.
Welcome back to Life Simplified. This is Tiffany, and I'm going to be your host for today's episode. This is the final episode in our month-long journey through bridging generations. And so we've been talking about and learning how to best communicate and connect with the people in our life that are from different generations, or maybe the opposite end of the generation that we are currently in. And so this week, we're diving into the newest generation to enter the workforce, Gen Z. So this is everyone who was born between 1997 and 2012. Now, full disclosure, this is not the youngest generation. We have Gen Alpha now that started in 2013, but this is the youngest generation and the newest one to enter the workforce. And so this is the newest generation that you may be working with at your place of business. So before we dive in too much, can any of you think of someone in your life who is a Gen Z?
My oldest child is Gen Z, my niece, and I'm trying to think, my youngest cousin might be Gen Z. I'm trying to think if he was a 97 or if he is millennial, but I'm thinking he might be Gen Z.
My nephews are Gen Z. My 3 children are Gen Z, and then also I have a niece. Well, I have several nieces and nephews that are Generation Z as well.
Okay. Well, I have 2 that I'm raising that are in Gen Z. My oldest and middle. My youngest is not. He's Alpha, which fits him. But also my niece and nephew are both Gen Z. And I actually have someone in my office I work with that is Gen Z. And then I have another one in my office who's like a cusper. She's the very end of millennial right there as it transitioned to Gen Z. So there are quite a few that I'm around and interact with on a regular basis. Let's talk about some characteristics that are typical of those born during this time period. And I will tell you all, unlike the other generations we've talked about in previous episodes, we don't have as much information yet because we're still figuring this generation out. They've just kind of emerged and are feeling their way through school and college and work life. So we don't have as much. But I think some key things that are really important to know about this generation is that they have never experienced a world without the internet and information at their fingertips. And that's pretty pivotal to know about this group, because every generation before them, they may know a world with internet, but they also can remember a time when that wasn't as prevalent and they couldn't just get information with the click of a button. But this generation, it's always been there for them.
So are you saying they don't know the dial-up internet sound?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. They'd be like, what is that noise? There's an alarm going off. What is this? Also, they do not remember a time without technology like cell phones, home computers, options for accessing television, so streaming and all the different streaming platforms we have, music, movies, everything, not just the internet, but all of the things, all of the technology and media. It's always been there for them. It's something they've always had access to and has always been available. And if you think about it, that's a lot. Like they're used to getting that information, getting that satisfaction of whatever that is in an instant. They were often handed smartphones or tablets to keep them entertained on family car trips. And I'll be honest, like I said, I'm raising 2 right now and even a younger generation. And this is true. Like I try very much at home to not just pacify with these type of things. But when you're in the car and you're on a long trip, it's really easy to, hand a gaming device or a tablet or a phone or a something to keep them entertained. And this generation, that has been what they've known for a majority. So that definitely has shaped who they are and how they interact. Also, FaceTime and video messaging emerged in their youth. So I think the video chatting is really big for this generation. And I will say for my daughter, it blows my mind when I go in her room and she's chatting with friends, because it's not on the phone. It's always on a FaceTime kind of thing. And they don't even have to be looking at each other. They'll be doing other things in their room. They'll be whatever, but they have that person on the screen. So they like to talk and interact on the phone, or at least she does and her friends do, but they want to also be able to see each other, which I think this is probably the first generation that is really prevalent as well. And I don't know, have y'all experienced that with any of your Gen Zs, that they want to talk and chat, but they like that visual along with it?
And they're not even doing anything. Like, they're just putting their makeup on or curling their hair, and sometimes they're not even talking. They're just on the phone together. I don't really know what to think about it, because if I'm going to be on the phone, let's talk about whatever we need to talk about, and then let's get off of the phone.
Well, as a Generation X, and my husband is on the low end of a Generation X, we love FaceTime. Mm-hmm. But my husband also works out of town. Yeah. And that is our way that we communicate with each other, is on FaceTime. So it may not be always, Generation Z also with that. Yeah. It may be some with the other generations too. So.
Yeah. And I think COVID really helped us all figure out how beneficial being able to connect in that way is. That, if you can't be there in person, or you can't see someone raw, that's like the next best thing, to be able to see that person and have that conversation and make that connection, and maybe even see where they are if they're traveling or somewhere else, so you get a picture into what they're experiencing and what their world is like. But they're the first generation, it came out for them. Like, they have known it from very young, how to communicate through video messaging. This was an interesting fact. They have a preference for digital communication, but value face-to-face communication, particularly in professional settings. And then they also prefer the video calls with friends. So that's kind of important to know, because I think as older generations, we might assume that because they've always had technology, they prefer to communicate. But if you have someone in your workplace, you may want to ask them, would you prefer face-to-face meetings, face-to-face staff get-togethers? If I'm asking you to do a project for me, do you prefer that to be face-to-face? Or if we're working together on some project, is it better for you to do it that way? Because that is something that several different research platforms noted was something they really value, is face-to-face communication in a professional setting. They tend to communicate with emojis, memes, images, and text. And I think that's true. I think other generations are also doing that. I think they're catching on to that. Even boomers, I know my mom and other boomers in my life use a lot of emojis. Maybe not so much video and picture images, but memes are big across the board. But yeah, I would say they definitely don't have to use a lot of words to communicate what's going on, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. This one's important too, and I think this makes a lot of sense and can really help, especially if you are marketing to this generation, is that they like information to be bite-sized and fun. So they want it to be fun, and they want it to be to the point. I don't want an hour-long lecture. I want some short information and make it entertaining. And I think we've seen that with the emergence of YouTube shorts and TikToks and different things like that. The videos, the short videos, clips, those short pieces of information in kind of a fun way. That's what resonates. Email, they say, is fine for most things, but why not pick the best tool for the task? So it may not always be email. Maybe it's a chat. Maybe it's a phone call. Maybe it's an in-person communication. So it's not a one-size-fits-all for this generation. I looked at some Pew report findings just to look at some things. And if you listened to last week's episode, you'll know that we mentioned that right now millennials are the most educated generation. But the Pew findings are showing that Gen Z is on track to be the best educated generation yet. And I think it's important to note that not only are they on track to be the best educated generation yet, that's not just with a degree from a college or a university. I think they're also looking at other tracks, different specialty certifications and trainings, trades, different ways of being educated on different skills that may or may not just be at a university or a college level. Also, worthy of noting is Gen Z is more racially and ethnically diverse than previous generations, which I think makes sense. But we're going to see more diversity than ever with this generation. And that's a good thing. And Gen Z, and this is cool, Gen Z and millennials, they found, have very similar viewpoints on many major issues. And so I think sometimes generations that follow one another, there's some dissonance, but what they're finding is like we have a lot of commonalities in how we feel about major issues that are going on right now. If you've listened, you know we have asked the same questions of every generation, just trying to dig in and get to know more about them. With this generation, I did ask some questions on social media and got lots of no responses. So I will just say maybe Facebook is not the thing. So just full disclosure there. But we were able to reach out to the Gen Zs that we know and get some responses. So let's kind of unpack what we know about this group. This first question, what is your most preferred method of communication as a Gen Zer? What do y'all think they answered?
Snapchat or texting, but I see Snapchat more than I see texting among this generation.
I would agree with that.
We got those answers for sure. Texting was probably the most prevalent, maybe because it's the most common with all people. I do think Snapchat is huge, and it was mentioned, but I don't know if it's because Snapchat seems to be more like within friend groups or like work groups, and maybe the texting is with all the people. But that definitely messaging, messaging was huge. I think I had one person say face-to-face, which again, in a professional setting, I think that is one of the preferred methods. And one person even said texting or none. Like, text me or do not communicate with me.
That's funny.
Okay.
I think it's funny because my kids are like, Mom, get off Snapchat. That's the only way I know that you're going to pay attention to me. And then I'll send mean looking faces at them if they don't respond.
That's funny. So. And I wonder too, because you all have older Gen Zs, so they are Snapchatting. I have younger Gen Zs, and they're not allowed to have Snapchat yet, so they're not Snapchatting. They are texting. But I think either way, whatever they have access to, I think it's messaging that they're really, that's the thing. And it goes along with what they want, those quick, to the point, and fun. And I think that's where all the memes and videos and things come into, because it's quick and it's fun. So it all kind of goes back together. So the next question we asked was, where do Gen Zers go for information on a new topic? So what do you all think?
Google.
Probably TikTok.
Or YouTube.
If they're allowed.
Yeah, if they're not allowed on TikTok, maybe YouTube. Yeah, if they can get their hands on it.
Yeah, all of that. Y'all like spot on. TikTok and Google were probably evenly mentioned. But yeah, again, TikTok is that short, fun, to the point. Google, I think Google's always existed for them. It's always been there. The internet and being able to search for information has always been there. So there's lots of TikTok, Google, and I was talking to my Gen Zer, my older Gen Zer, last night, and he was being kind of goofy and not wanting to respond to me. But when I asked this question, he tried to ignore me. But my husband was like, "Oh, I know where you go. You go to YouTube Shorts," and I was like, "Yeah." Definitely. Like that's where he's getting information. And I think that's probably across the board too, is just those short pieces of information and also just internet in general. What was the most defining event of this generation for Gen Zs?
COVID.
Yeah. COVID, because it changed the way that they did school. It completely changed the way that they communicated. There was a big shift there when COVID happened.
Yeah. Because, see, it happened the year my youngest graduated high school. And so her whole senior year was messed up. She didn't get to experience all the things that the boys did when they graduated. And it kind of upsets her when we talk about it because she didn't get to walk across that stage. They had a stage, but we had to watch her from our car We dropped her off. She walked across the stage and got it. Just missing all things of graduation for her was probably a big event.
Yeah, and that was the resounding answer from everyone, that COVID was definitely the most defining event that they've experienced so far. And I think it was because it did change every aspect of what they did. It wasn't like a one event that maybe affected some people. It affected everyone. And particularly with this generation, when you think about being 97 to 2012, every one of them were in school. So every one of them really had to pivot in how they learned, how they interacted socially, the things they could and couldn't do. Like, it made a huge impact at a very pivotal point in their life when they're really growing a lot and really taking on their personality and learning about themselves and others. And so I think it makes perfect sense that for this generation, and probably they will almost always say this, that was a very impactful event for their generation. We asked them if they related more with the millennials that were right before them or Gen Alpha that is following after them. I think this is just going to ring true to all of the generations. I think it really falls whoever you're closest to and what end of that spectrum you're on and what you're doing in your life. Like who you're surrounded by, who you're interacting with socially. Now, I did have most said millennials. However, most were also older Gen Zs, so that made sense. Did have one that said Gen Alpha, and then one surprisingly said neither. That they didn't feel like conversations with either of those other groups felt as sincere as having conversations within their own generation. And I appreciate that candid honesty, honestly. But I think it all is pretty relative to where you fall on that continuum. I would imagine if you're born in 1997, millennials are right there with you. And if you're 2012, you were almost an alpha. So that's going to kind of go into play. There are some tips for communicating specifically with Gen Zers, and we've talked about some of these, but I just kind of want to reiterate them. We know they prefer face-to-face in a workplace setting. They also like video calls, so again, being able to see each other, reading body language, that can be important. But this tip I found in one of our sources that it will be linked in our show notes, but it said, when you communicate with a Gen Z, you want to get right to the point. So again, be very to the point, not a lot of fluff. You might even want to use their preferred mode of communication. So shoot them a text, update their iCal, send them a GChat or a Facebook message, go where they are. Like, use what they're using, speak their language, so to speak. And if you can make it bite-sized and fun, which we've mentioned numerous times, then they're much more likely to pay attention to it. So being too wordy or maybe a little boring may not catch their attention. They may not pay attention to you. Also, it says beware of lectures. They will tune out faster than you can say 140 characters. So I think the overall theme that we found here for them is like, make it fun, make it interesting, make it quick and to the point. The last thing that I kind of had is I looked up some influential events because, like we said, we know COVID was pivotal for them. But there were a couple other things that I thought were worthy of mentioning. Social networking was mentioned because that's really how they communicate. Social networking is big for them. And so that being how we access each other is huge. The fact that they are smartphone and mobile first, like that's all they've ever known. That's always been accessible. Gun violence, I thought, was one, especially, when you think about gun violence in schools or mass terrorism. That is something that has been something they've experienced and has been in the media a lot in their generation and definitely impacts them and how they view things. Also, the election of Barack Obama, that was huge. That was a pivotal moment for them and something that they will always remember. Shared family responsibilities. And I wondered what that was at first, but that has been really big for their generation. They're seeing more of household duties being split and shared and everybody working together. And so that's going to be pivotal for this group. Climate change was mentioned, the always wired connectivity, so being connected all the time. Corporate social responsibility, I think that's been something that's been a little bit new. Like, you see more big corporations trying to take on some kind of activism of some type and being more socially responsible, whatever that platform may be. It's different for different ones. Gender equality is big for this generation. and then they had Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So they have had some things. I think definitely we still go to COVID as being kind of the big one, but there's been a lot that this generation has experienced that will shape them differently than the generations before. I'm really intrigued by this generation, and I think we're going to learn more and more as more of them join us in the workplace. And I look forward to their creativity and their use of technology and their understanding of it. I think they're going to add a lot, and we'll learn more as we go. Thank you all for joining us. If you have not heard all of these, please go back and listen to all the generations. It's definitely enlightening, and it's always fun to learn more about each other and how we can connect and communicate on a deeper level. So thank you for joining us. This is Life Simplified.
Thanks for listening to Life Simplified. We are family and consumer sciences agents with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. Contact us at lifesimplifiedpodcast@gmail.com.